A little bit of background on me. I actually ran a nonprofit childcare center. I was the executive director for about 8 years, but my entire life has been in early learning. I worked at a Head Start. I worked at Girls Inc. for a few years.
Okay.
A couple of my former colleagues here today.
All right.
And then, of course, ran the childcare center for those 8 years, right out of college. So my passion has always been there, and we've really hit a new level with the issues in childcare. And so I appreciate you all being here. First, I guess a couple logistical things. We do have restrooms right out this door. Keep walking past the main doors on your right-hand side. We are going to be joined. There are some folks on Zoom today. So Danielle works for me right here. Thank you, Danielle. She's going to be maybe asking some questions as they come in from online. So bear with us on that one. I'd like to first just thank all of the partners who have been helping us put this business collaborative together. And of course, I'll explain what the business collaborative is all about, what our intentions are with it. But Elevate Rapid City, John T. Vikurovich Foundation, and the South Dakota Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and of course, Early Learner South Dakota. So these 4 organizations have really been a part of the steering committee, if you will, to bring together these meetings. We initially announced this business collaborative in October of our Early Learner Summit, October 2022, had an East River meeting on December 8th, and now this is our West River meeting. First thing I want to say is the intent is not to have an East River and West River collaborative. This will be a joint collaborative. This is just for convenience for people to come today and listen and learn. So second, I do want everyone to know our lovely little owl here will be recording the meeting today. This is for anyone who maybe didn't have a chance to come today and not be present with us on Zoom, to have access to that later. And maybe even for you, if you're wondering, hey, what was it that she said? If you want to go back and reflect, we'll post that on our Early Learner South Dakota as a YouTube page. We'll post that on our YouTube page by next week. So Early Learner South Dakota, first I want to give you guys a little bit of an update of what is Early Learner South Dakota. Some of you know, some of you may not know. We started, a little bit of history here is our organization started first with an initial conversation that happened in December of 2018. We had a group of individuals, stakeholders, if you will, leaders in early learning, who said, let's get together and really figure out how we can come together and talk about, we need to talk together about how we're going to move the childcare field forward. Because at that time, think about, this is pre-pandemic, and we're still having many of the issues now. In April of 2019, we had our first official meeting at the Early Childhood Conference here that year. SDAUIC, which stands for the South Dakota Association for the Education of Young Children. It's a mouthful, so just say SDAUIC or SDAC. They had applied for a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it was able to allow us to start kickstart this work. Later down the road, we had another part ally called the Alliance for Early Success, who in the early days of the pandemic said, we want to have a representative of the Alliance in every single state. Every child, every state is their tagline essentially. And so they chose Early Learner South Dakota to be their partner. So now we get an annual operating grant from them. Plus, we get connections with amazing national allies. Operating dollars are great, but honestly, the knowledge that we've gotten from our national partners has just been that much better. So the Alliance, how they work is they actually fund the national partners to work with us on a more intentional way than if we were just to ask some Q&A questions to any kind of national partner. So that's essentially how this works. Now, a couple of in early, I would say May of 2022, we were approached by 2 of our partners, which were the Bipartisan Policy Center and the United States Chamber of Commerce Foundation. And they said to me at that time, so do you think South Dakota has enough business, economic development, chamber, community leaders who really want to get together around the table and focus on childcare? I said, absolutely yes, because believe it or not, I had more economic development offices and chambers calling me during the time of the pandemic saying, how can we solve this crisis of childcare? I can't get workers businesses are closing down, they're limiting hours, they can't get workforce, and one of the main things they're saying is childcare, the lack of available childcare. It was amazing. I was expecting I was going to be contacted by more providers, but all of a sudden you see this industry and business and economic growth and development that is really taking this keen interest in childcare for, I would say, the first time maybe ever in South Dakota. So with that, I said, yes, absolutely. So they flew a few of us out to DC, talked to us about being a part of the 9-state cohort for this business collaborative, and said, just run with it. They gave us guidance, but they said, this is really supposed to be built in South Dakota for South Dakota, really kind of establish it however you think most necessary. So this is when we announced the collaborative at the summit, and now we are having our first few meetings. So what I want to do here today is, I always like to remind myself of the why I do this. And I was asked that question recently, and I actually went into private business a little over a year ago, and was going to be spending more time with my kiddos. I have put a lot into Early Learner South Dakota because it's the right thing to do and because it's necessary. And I know that that's going to speak a lot to my children later on, more so, and standing up for what's right. So with that, I found a couple of really fun videos. I just think we'll bring the why back for a couple of you and let you know my why. Is I did a fundraiser for the childcare center I was with, and I asked a couple of little kiddos why they liked going to school. And here are a couple of their responses. What's your name?
Desmond.
What's your favorite thing about being at school here?
What's your name?
Desmond.
What's your favorite thing about being at school here?
Playing and watching a movie.
Playing what?
Playing
So what do you think would be when you grow up?
playing the house and playing the puzzle.
So what do you want to be when you grow up?
The aspirations,
Real Batman to save the
right? I mean,
world.
I'm gonna save the world, and that's what made me think that's right. I am doing the right thing in this moment in my life because my little guy thought he could save the world. I'm gonna show him that, dang it, we're gonna try. Here's what's your name? Sorry about that. I go to, and that's my son. This one is not mine, but a really good friend of mine, and she was too cute not to show you.
You have a Wonder Woman costume?
Is that your favorite?
I do like Wonder Woman, yes.
Me too.
So is that who you're going to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
Okay.
I am a grown up already, so I can wear my costume.
Oh, perfect.
There's nothing like being put in place by a or no, 3-year-old at that time. So I just wanted to share my why with you and why
You have a Wonder Woman.
every day and why it is so important. And now many of you are maybe asking, why my business? Why should my industry get involved? And one of those partners I had mentioned that we have is Council for Strong America Ready Nation. They're an organization that specifically works with businesses to help them advocate. They highlight your business specifically. They help write an op-ed. They'll write the op-ed for you. You can sign your name to it, and then they'll publish it throughout the state with their media contacts. They will help give you talking points. If you want to go to the state legislature and you need some advice there, they'll hop on a call with you. They're truly an amazing group that has helped our businesses get involved. And they did a series where they took many of their business leaders from across the United States and asked them exactly, why are you as a business getting involved in childcare? I'd like to share this one with you, and as a follow-up to this presentation, you will be receiving an email with the full links if you'd be interested in listening to a few more business owners.
Hi, I'm Hugh Welsh. I'm the president of BSM North America. Through our business, I've come to learn that we have a childcare crisis in this country. And, you know, childcare centers that we visited in the past are now out of business. Hi, I'm Hugh Welsh. I'm the president of BSM North America. Through our business, I've come to learn that we have a childcare crisis in this country. And, you know, childcare centers that we would visit in the past are now out of business as a consequence of the pandemic. And our employees who in the past had, childcare possibilities in some of the more rural locations where we have operations, those possibilities went away. This childcare crisis has had a profound impact on our operations, our employees, and I think even most importantly, on the children themselves. I would encourage all business leaders to become proactive advocates for childcare. It's important, first and foremost, for your operations. More and more, we have a very diverse workforce. We're going to require an even more diverse workforce going forward. And for those employees to come to work for your company, not be it men or be it women, they're going to need good, effective, and cost-efficient childcare. We think that we live in a society today where people, regardless of gender, race, national origin, should have a full and fair opportunity to reach their potential, and that would require that we have childcare available to them at a reasonable price, at a high-quality level, so that they can both participate in the workforce.
I'm sure the majority of you are here today because you are interested in the solutions for childcare. Now, I do promise we do have an entire list of solutions that we will cover. We have many examples of different states, what they're doing at the state level, what they're doing at the community level, and we're going to be discussing those as well. The United States Chamber of Commerce Foundation recently added childcare, not quite really recently, but they've added childcare to their policy agenda, and they've really been doing a lot of work around why businesses need to be involved and invested in childcare. So I might not show this entire video, but they again did another series, and why I thought it might be important, especially with this group, to showcase this, is we actually, it features Black Hills Energy. Do we have any Black Hills Energy representatives in the room? So I'm going to show you this today. They are listed as one of our solutions on the solution page that you have in your folders. But for now, let's just see what they have to say.
Being a working parent brings so much complexity and challenge, but it's extremely rewarding. I love that my boys will see me have a career and do the things that I'm passionate about, and I'm also able to provide what they need and high quality care while I'm at work.
My name is Jennifer Landis. I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer here at Black Hills. We are a diversified energy provider, predominantly with gas and electric utilities, in 8 states in the middle portion of the United States. We serve about 1.3 million customers, and we believe that we improve life with energy, and that starts with our employee team.
My name is Christine Watts. I've been with Black Hills Energy for 6 years now, and I lead our organizational development and diversity teams, and I have 2 boys who attend the Child Development Center here at Black Hills Energy.
We introduced our on-site child development center.
Having the Child Development Center at work is huge for my family. I just really underestimated how much I would appreciate having my children close to me, having one spot to do drop-offs in the morning, and just the convenience, and then just ultimately knowing that it's high quality care and education that they're getting.
Our Child Development Center is an on-site environment that is available to employees at our headquarters location. Here at Horizon Point, which is our headquarters, we have about 750 employees, and we had a real issue recruiting people to the area, particularly because of a lack of availability in our community at the time of the Child Development Center availability. So we actually had people that we would recruit in, we would bring them here, we'd talk to them, we'd offer them a job, and they'd turn us down because there was not enough available child development spots in our community. So one of the things that we decided we needed to do when we built this beautiful, amazing headquarters was include our Child Development Center.
In the Rapid City area, there aren't a lot of employers that do this, and we definitely have a shortage of childcare providers. So being able to provide that benefit is a competitive advantage from a recruitment and retention perspective, but ultimately I think sends a strong message that Black Hills Energy is willing to support their employees. They're willing to meet them where they're at and support them and their families.
You have to be an employee in order to gain access to our on-site child development center. Employees pay what we consider to be a market rate. We can take 48 children today, and last I heard we had a wait list of close to 30. Even just looking out the window and seeing the child development center and the colorful playground equipment and the kids having ball, it really supported the culture we wanted here at Black Hills.
When I tell other people that I'm able to bring my kids and have them go to the child development center or on-site at work, a lot of people are just blown away at how great of an employee service that is, and particularly those who have struggled to find quality childcare.
It solved a recruiting problem for us. It is definitely something that helps us become an employer of choice in the area by having our on-site child development center. If a company is thinking about what employees need in the future, I think we have to be honest about the fact that employee expectations are changing, and that it's not just about joining a company with a good mission. That's critical, but it's also about that company's ability to support that employee's lifestyle. We employ the whole person, not just the 8 to 5 person.
Yeah.
Yeah, you love airplanes. Do you remember when you were on an airplane?
Yeah.
Offering something like on-site child development center, I think, is a great way to acknowledge that the whole person is coming to work, and that whole person has needs outside of just what they provide 8 to 5 and what they need during a work day.
When you get to connect with your coworkers on more of a personal level, you get to see their kids, your kids get to grow up together. It brings a whole different dynamic to that relationship, and that definitely spills over into the workplace.
So this goes to show you just one solution. Now, we understand that this is not a solution that every business can take on. This is a very limited number of businesses that could go to this level. But for most of you, you may or may not really understand the true landscape of the childcare field as it is today. It was really always an unsustainable business model, and it is even more so with the effects of the pandemic. So think about it this way. Let's say you're a grocery store or gas station. When you have inflation and your increased costs, what do you do to make up for that loss? You increase the cost of what you're selling your goods for, right? It's simple. You have lots of different ways to bring in that revenue. When you're talking about childcare in South Dakota, there is one lever for income, and that is parent fees. So if you want to, the average childcare worker in South Dakota right now is being paid $11 an hour. So if you want to increase what you're paying your employee for a livable wage beyond $11 an hour, as we know that is not a livable wage in South Dakota, especially with the inflation and all of that, we would need to directly increase parent fees. Parents are already struggling to pay for the cost of childcare as it is. So to increase it even more, you're going to, it can be sustainable. It can, for a very small percentage of people who make enough money to make that amount of money work. What's not gonna work is the children who typically fall in your gap. There are two ways that children are that you can be funded in South Dakota if you're a childcare entity. You can get childcare assistance, which is for a very small population. I would say when I was running my center, that was only about 20% of my kiddos. And it's not a reliable source of income because it was based on hours, not attendance. Now, when I had a hospitality worker, their hours were crazy in the summer. during the height of tourism, okay? And they were coming a lot. They actually came too much, and I couldn't charge the state enough to get back the amount of hours they were staying. But on the reverse end, in the winter, they maybe got sent home after 2 hours. There weren't enough people staying in the hotel. So they'd come and pick up their kiddo from my childcare center, and I could only charge for those 2 hours. So now I'm taking a risk accepting children who need this care the most. So changing that from attendance-based rather than, enrollment-based rather than attendance-based is one thing we can do kind of within the state to improve that system. The only other source of revenue that you can, and again, these are not state dollars, they are all federal flow-through dollars. There are 0 state dollars going to childcare as of right now in South Dakota. You can get what's called the USDA food program dollars. It's a very complicated program, and both of these programs, I should mention, you have to be registered or licensed to get any of those dollars. And why that's important to note is that in South Dakota, we have about 2,100 providers. We know that based on federal income tax returns. There are 800 that are registered, which means 60% of our entire market is unregulated and unregistered. And why that makes a difference is, especially if you are an investor and you want to know if opening a childcare building is a good investment, you literally have no way of knowing if there's a market in any particular community in South Dakota. Because if there are 60% who are unregistered, there's no way to find them or communicate with them. You quite literally have no idea where they're operating in the state. That's where it gets tricky. So that's another hurdle. Now, again, going back to the $11 an hour, businesses are struggling to find workforce. Now, think about how hard it would be to find someone to be paid $11 an hour and to watch a bunch of 10 2-year-olds for an 8-hour day with no break. Not only is that, it's mentally, physically, maybe spiritually exhausting for you, and you're getting paid less than you might be getting paid at, let's say, McDonald's, Target. I mean, Subway was offering $15 with a $500 sign-on bonus. No childcare center that I know of was offering sign-on bonuses. I think actually maybe a couple, but that is not a common thing. And again, it's very rare. I do have to see some childcare providers in here, so I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So really looking at that and understanding that childcare is actually quite a big industry in South Dakota. On average, we bring in about $279 million to the state as a collective. But we do know, based on the report that was released by Ready Nation, one of our national allies will send that report out to you too in a follow-up email. We're losing $146 million in this state based on lost work productivity. Parents not having childcare, not being able to find childcare, their kiddos are sick, they're constantly missing work, or they're leaving because they can't afford it. So you're retraining, you're rehiring. This process costs money to businesses. This is why it's important for us to start having a conversation beyond the childcare field. This is no longer a childcare industry issue only, seeping into economic development and to our business growth. So with that, I did give you a lot of information. I do want to just pause and ask if there are any questions so far. We can just hop into the solutions, but Alan, it looks like you might have a question. No, okay. Okay, well, we're moving on. Please do not feel afraid. I feel like I maybe should have, I cramped our Sioux Falls group so tightly that maybe they felt forced to ask questions. I wanted to give you guys a little more space. So we will move on to our business solutions. Now, you guys were each given a folder at your table. It includes the agenda. It includes the one pagers that give you many of the stats revolving around childcare in the field, and it also gives you the solutions at the back in one of the back pages. So I am going to just because I think, again, this is what the main reason a lot of you are here. We are going to cover these individually. And again, then from there, we're going to lead into roundtable discussions where, and I'll have a few prompting questions for you when we get to that point. So we're really trying to tackle this in a few different ways. One, we're trying to give communities and businesses ideas that they can help, that can help them right now. Because again, we know that businesses are saying, I can't wait 2 years, you know, for a state level solution to happen. I am in crisis right now with my employees. What can we do? We're actively working on trying to collect solutions that you can implement now and easily and affordably, hopefully, while also looking at long-term sustainable solutions, which means we are going to have to be having conversations about private-public partnerships and working with the state, legislation changes. We'll get to that. So the first one on here, Pioneer Bank and Trust, I had mentioned is giving a $5,000 stipend to any employee for childcare. That is childcare and after school. They do give it only per one employee. So that is limited, and they pay, what's interesting about this is they pay the provider directly. So it does not affect the employee's income overall. This has worked really well for them and has really increased the retention in their program. I have also listed the contact information with approval from each of these organizations. You have contact information in order to reach out and ask more questions if you have that interest. The second one, Black Hills Energy. I won't go over this too much because we did watch a video regarding their program. Obviously, they have on-site care. The only concern with this program for them is that they didn't build a big enough center. The gentleman who was part of building the center said, man, I wish we would have created more space. And the one interesting thing is, I would say, and actually they might have said it in here, but I do want to make sure to just note this again, is again, they contract directly with a provider already doing business. So that is another interesting fact to keep in mind, is that a lot of these organizations are sole proprietors. They're the small business in South Dakota, and they already have the liability figured out, the licensing figured out. So contracting, instead of trying to create a childcare on your own and figuring out all these rules on your own, would probably be a cost reduction in and of itself. Elevate Rapid City. They have created a loan and grant program for childcare providers for the Rapid City area only. There is, for large centers, there's $100,000 available for expansion grants. And how it was explained to me is essentially, when you're having the capital to purchase a building, purchase land, that gives you that down payment to help with that part of the process. The $10,000 grants are how they sound. Oh, and this loan is a zero interest loan. That's worth mentioning. $10,000 grants are grants. They're not loans. They are not required to be paid back, but I believe there are stipulations in how long the provider has to operate in order to receive that grant. But again, for expansion at a home-based level. You can read more about that one. The next one, again, the Federal Reserve Bank. This is more regional solutions. And this is really, they talk a lot about what we're doing with this collaborative right here. Talking about connecting more with philanthropic leaders, employers, local leaders to find financing opportunities. There are a couple of organizations which I'm realizing I don't have on here. We're going to be updating this one. I did not decide to update between the 8th and this meeting, but organizations like First Children Finance are also national organizations that generally give out loans at a reduced rate to providers in order for them to start up. My childcare center, actually, the nonprofit childcare center I worked for was funded. We got a main loan from them. There was an interesting bill that came forward in the state legislature last year, which could be an interesting concept. I thought I would throw it in here just for some legislation that has, there's been some interest at the state level. That was a reduction of a tax bill. So if you are a provider, the goal was to get a certain percentage reduced on your property tax per year if you were in-home or center-based provider. Now, again, that could help on a, I would say, a very minor level. It's still not going to help the overall bottom line of providers, so they're staying in business longer and providing care for our workforce. Let's see, and the South Dakota Association for the Education of Young Children, we do currently have an endowment, and that is the goal of that endowment was that if we were able to increase it enough to a certain degree, that the interest from that endowment could be to fund what we call the kiddos in the gap. So there are the kiddos who have childcare assistance, they qualify for that, or they qualify for Head Start. But there is a massive amount of children whose parents are still not affluent enough to pay the weekly bills for their childcare provider, and they're largely retail tourism parents. They're the ones who are keeping your doors open to your restaurants, working at your grocery store, and they just don't make enough to qualify for childcare. They are struggling to make childcare work for them. So the endowment essentially would fund this program. And it's a lot like how the Starting Strong program works with the John T. Vukovich Foundation, is they fund kiddos in the gap. Now, I'm not going to go too much into that. I believe I actually have them on here as one of the solutions, but I know Alan's coming up later to talk and he can hit on that a little bit at once. Okay. So with that being said, we're not necessarily looking to subsidize everybody and all the workers. If we could get to that point, great. But even if we could find those kiddos, because then that way the providers know they have reliable income coming in, and those parents are able to continue to go to work. Let's see, a couple other community solutions. I had a call from we're vastly made up of rural and remote communities here in South Dakota. And I had a community call. They were a community of about 500. And they were looking for care for, and it was only 7 kids, but still in this community of 500, 7 kids potentially means multiple parents who aren't able to find work because they have nowhere for their kids to go. So in that economy, it could be drastically affecting them. And where the crux of the issue happened was they were in the library, they could no longer be in the library, and they could not get insurance, liability insurance. They had a community center. I actually come from a community of 500 Northeast South Dakota, Rossult, if anyone's heard of it. It was not this community, but we all have that community center, where all the weddings are, all the town halls, the street dances, those types of things. They wanted to have the childcare center in this community building. And so I had asked if I had a friend in the governor's office of economic development at the time, and I said, could an economic development office be a fiscal sponsor and possibly provide general liability? And their answer was, well, yeah, I think so. You can also do that as a nonprofit. Nonprofit can also, or a business can also be a fiscal sponsor. Another concept we've seen was shared space. So I've seen this and I've worked with this directly in Lee Deadwood. The school district had an excess of space. And so they said to us, and we were looking at already not having enough space in our 60 child center. And I said, absolutely. So they allowed us, we created a simple MOU. And they allowed us to have a classroom, which meant that we didn't have any additional overhead. And they covered the insurance and all of those types of things. And we were simply able to operate our program, an extension of our program. It also helped that it was quite literally a block away from our childcare center. So that helped. The distance and proximity helped because we did not have a vehicle. But those are also some opportunities. Maybe there's a business who is has a room available. It does not have to necessarily be a school district. As long as you're able to properly license the room through the Department of Social Services, it worked just fine. So again, this is a start to the solutions. We have gotten many from our December 8th meeting. I do not have them added on here, and I'm hoping that we get many more. But again, I wanted to take a minute and pause and see if you all had any questions, comments on the solutions we've discussed thus far before we move into table discussions. Yeah.
Is there any legislation proposed that you know of that's coming this session?
Great question. I'm going to say none that I know of at this moment. I will also say that Early Learner South Dakota does not intend to put any or work with any legislators on bills for this session. Now, that's why these conversations are very important, because we need to take the time to make a very intentional, well thought out plan for sustainability and not try and throw something together. Because we want to make sure it lasts, it stands the test of time, and we want people to come around and support it. And I'll tell you, this is why this is so important. As a childcare provider for many years, I was quite frankly embarrassed. I was paying my staff at that point in time, some of them $7.25, because that was minimum wage at the point, and maybe $9 an hour if they were a lead teacher. And at the same time, I had parents. I had a mother who I later found out was living in her car. And for some reason, she could not get the childcare assistance. She was afraid of her former partner, and so she did not get childcare assistance. But she said, I know that this place is safe for him. I know that he gets warm, loving care and healthy meals. So I am going to make this a priority. That struck me. And the fact that I have to say to my employees, I can't pay you anymore. As a nonprofit, I still had to raise $80,000 to $100,000 a year every single year just to make ends meet, paying that little amount and charging that amount to my parents. It's rough. So when we're talking long-term sustainable solutions, we really need to make sure we're intentional. And for the longest time, it's always been the childcare industry who's been saying, it's kind of a mess over here, and we kind of need to talk about some solutions. But finally, we have businesses and economic development and investors who are saying, we all need to look at this because we're all being impacted. So that's what's I'm saying. We're going to be taking this year to be very strategic in what we try to hopefully put forward, maybe 2024, maybe 2025, kind of just depends on how it all goes from here. Any other questions? Any questions from the chat?
Not yet.
You guys are such a quiet group. I could not get the Sioux Falls people to stop talking. I thought we're gonna run out of time. Well, okay, so now I'm going to maybe even put you in an uncomfortable position, and you're going to have to talk at roundtables. So what we're going to do is I have a few different table facilitators. Danielle, how many facilitators do we need for online?
I got it.
Manage, perfect. Okay, so my table facilitators, if you would all raise your hands so everyone knows where you are. So yeah, okay, so Carrie and Sam will split up, but if you are not at Sam, which table would you like to move to?
We've got some big ones over here, guys.
So if you are not at a table with a facilitator, please move to a table with a facilitator. And what we're going to do is, before you move, all right. My priority is to get at least the first 2 questions answered. Your facilitators will all have a sheet that have all 4 questions. I would love for you all to do some introductions. The facilitator will write down their name and your name and affiliation. on the paper. And if we could at least get to the top 2 questions, which are there any local solutions happening in your particular community? Because as you may or may not know, there are multiple communities represented at this meeting, not just Rapid City. And then where would you like to see this collaborative go? My goal is to at least have those 2 questions answered. If you are speedy, my facilitators have been asked to prod you a little, so you can be quiet. But if there is additional time for questions, we are going to look at these 2 bottom questions here. Before we move, any questions before we begin? Okay, again, table facilitators, if you would please raise your hand, keep your hand up, and please move if you are not at the table with a facilitator.
You take a bit.
I can move over to.
Oh, there you go. I got over here.
Thanks, but that.
We want to just. I can go over there if you want me.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Listen in for a little bit.
Okay, everyone, don't be shy. All right, light here.
It's very bright.
Yes, it is. Okay, so Janessa is actually moderating a table in the room. So Erica, Amanda, Mark, Alyssa, and Nicole. I'm Danielle, so that's my phone that I have off to the side here. And Scott, let's talk.
So
Do you want to introduce yourself?
yeah, absolutely. I am the Workforce Development Director for the Great Falls Area Chamber of Commerce here in Great Falls, Montana. I am also Executive Director of our Chamber's dedicated workforce development initiative called Central Montana Works. And incidentally, I am actually a part of the U.S. Chamber Foundation's Early Childhood Business Advisory Council. So I attended that summit in Denver and will be going to the next one in Huntsville towards the tail end of next month. So very, very familiar with those discussions that are happening between the U.S. Chamber Foundation and the Bipartisan Policy Center. And it's really awesome to see you guys getting after it of your own accord and trying to come up with state level solutions. So for our part here in Great Falls, we're actually working on kind of a hybrid collaborative model where we have partnered with the city for space. And we have an investment co-op of businesses that are, in essence, providing investment into what we're calling the Community Early Education Center. And the overarching goal is to serve the downtown business improvement district with an opportunity for those employers, be they hoteliers or restaurateurs or the tavern owners or whatnot, to offer up safe, vetted, and affordable childcare as a part of their benefits package in an effort to get folks either back into or into the workforce. Like everywhere else, childcare is a significant hindrance for single parents, especially, to get into the workforce. So this is one of the ways that we are kind of thinking outside of the traditional container and encouraging employers to put skin in the game in order to ensure that they are looking after their employees and investing on their employees, considering that, you know, the return on investment for every dollar they spend on childcare, they get at least $4, if not more, back in productivity out of those employees. So we're doing a lot of outreach, a lot of education to those business owners right now, encouraging them to join that investment cooperative. And we have shared services providers all under one roof, where we will be doing not just the standard early childhood ed or daycare sort of model, but we will have occupational therapy and speech therapy and behavioral therapy available, as well as the all-inclusive needs for the kids that are either physically or emotionally fragile. The facility that we're going to be occupying has an industrial grade professional level kitchen in it, has a gymnasium, as well as a stage area to do programs and whatnot. So that's what we're building out here in this community. And I would say arguably that is how I ended up on that national level task force through the U.S. Chamber Foundation, because of this initiative.
Nicole has also sent a message in the chat. Yeah, absolutely. So if you read what she says, it helps to have the most updated providers and provider information. The helpline center is statewide, and they are usually the go-to place if somebody needs resources that they otherwise don't know how to find or access. And I mean, if we don't have the most updated information to give them, then they don't always have the best info to pass on. Okay. Who would like to go next?
I'm going to jump in if I can, because I have an interview coming here in about 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
I am the child care director for the YMCA down here in Custer. And the biggest things that we're doing in our community is our Early Learners of Custer group is just trying to educate the businesses here of the need to support all childcare so that it can be offered to, quality childcare can be offered to all children. But I think a lot of times they just don't understand that they need to support that. They did, if you don't have kids in a childcare, you don't even think about it. So we have had a big push in the last month and a half to meet with like our Chamber of Commerce and our county and city and our economic development. And hopefully some of them are there in person today, because that was kind of our big push, was to get people there, and hopefully they can understand more that they need to help childcare just in general. But I'm going to, I have my assistant here who's going to listen to the rest of this. So if somebody else comes on for me, that's what's going on. Thanks
Great.
for hosting it.
Thanks, Erica. All right, who's next? Mark or Amanda, would you like to share? Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. My name is Amanda Anglin. So I'm the executive director for the Sturgis Economic Development Corporation. And, we're seeing the similar challenges to all the other communities. Everyone's full, the prices are what they are. And so in the past, what we have done is a public-private partnership. And I wasn't here with the organization when we did this, but we helped build a building and found someone to run, and eventually sold the building and the business to a daycare center in Sturgis. And that's been running, I think it's been 5 or 6 years, and it's been a really good asset to our community. I do know that they are full and experiencing some of the same challenges as everyone else, but that's one thing that did work for us.
Okay, and do you know how that public-private partnership came to being? Was that proposed by a certain organization or
I think
kind
it
of
was
spearheaded
it
that,
was
do you know?
yeah, I think our organization spearheaded that because we had such a need, and so we took the reins and got it completed. I'd have to look into it more for the
Sure.
details if somebody wanted more information, just because, like I said, I wasn't a part of the organization when that project was complete.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing.
Can you hear me okay?
I sure can. Hi, Mark.
Perfect. Hello. Mark Papasek. So I actually work for Monument Health Foundation. Monument Health obviously is had a daycare associated with the Rapid City primary hospital for an extended period of time. I don't know for sure how long. However, one area where we currently have some needs are at all of our outlying facilities, Spearfish, Lee, Deadwood, Sturgis, as well as Custer. And even as a parent of a soon-to-be 3-year-old, my son currently does not go to daycare at the Monument Health Daycare, just for no other reason that I was very fortunate to have reliable daycare that he was doing very, very well at. And I started with Monument Health just short of a year ago, and I just didn't want to upset the fruit basket. I was like, it's working. I can financially make this work. We're just going to stick with it. Now, that said, I would say in also the flexibility that Kayla speaks about of the childcare hours or ability to pick up, drop off and everything can also be very important. Due to my role, there's quite a few times when I'm doing evening events after my current child care center is closed. So I'm lining up either friends or his aunt many times to watch my son. So, but in the grand scheme of things, there are services available. I know that there's a waiting list even for the Rapid City Child Care Center. And like I say, right now, there is not an option for my coworkers outside of our Rapid City market.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's it really does seem like there's an overflow and a wait list kind of everywhere. I'd like to, I'll pick on you again, Mark. I'd like to know like what you would like to see from this collaborative. Like, what do you think would be the best outcome as a result of all of us meeting like this and collaborating and working together to solve these issues in our communities?
Ultimately, I would say it is going to have to be a truly collective effort between the businesses, the parents, and frankly, probably the communities. Not a whole lot different than like Sturgis or Great Falls partnering with some of the city organizations. And just seeing, I think a lot of it has been garnered already through people starting the conversations and working together towards it. I think what'll be telling is this next year, getting those organizations to really lay the foundation and make it all happen to get it to come together. Because unfortunately, as Kayla had mentioned, it's not a model that financially works on its own like a typical business. And while I work for a not-for-profit now, I spent 18 years in a very much for-profit return on investment driven business. And it unfortunately just for most income levels will not work in that fashion. It's going to take support, external support.
Absolutely. Amanda, would
Danielle,
you like to add?
I have a question first. Is the collaborative considering anything around after school care for kids that are not necessarily needing the, traditional daycare setting, but just something in that after school time?
Sure. I know that right now our primary focus is on like full-time or full daycare for children 0 to 5. We do collaborate a lot with the after school network here in South Dakota. And, if there's ever like Children's Day at the Capitol is coming up next week, that's something that we are kind of co-hosting with them. And we very much work alongside each other, but that's kind of their lane, whereas childcare is more our lane. So.
Sure. Okay. I guess I would contribute. My kids are in elementary school now, so I don't have the need for full-time daycare. But when we did, one of the things that was super important to me was that flexibility and not being tied to like a weekly cost, or if I only worked half a day or my husband had the day off, those types of things to keep the cost down. So I think solutions around that type of structure would be beneficial, especially to those of our businesses and employees in the service industry where their hours vary, and Mark had touched on that a little bit.
So as a result of this collaborative, what would you like to see from businesses or future childcare providers for folks who have these demanding hours?
Can you come again with that question here, or which number was it that you were on there? I didn't quite hear you.
That was just kind of an expansion of the second question. So because so many parents have these varying hours and time slots that they need care for, like, what do you think that this collaborative can help do to ensure that their needs are being considered as well?
I guess, and I should state that like my thoughts are not representative of my employer, Monument Health, at all. But that is one thing, obviously, for any of our nurses or doctors or anything, they have a very odd schedule, very much like Amanda said as well, where people are on and off at odd times, different days. The child care center currently with Monument Health is open, broader hours than most, but it is not a 24/7 facility currently. But that's really hard. It would be wonderful if the collaborative could work to get expanded hours into the evening, as well as for those kids that are over 5 and everything like after school and such. But then the cost of providing that would be very, very significant for what would be a dwindling number of children. So I don't know that I have a real good answer for that. Would there be a need? Certainly. I run into it, I would say, once to twice a week, where I have to get creative after childcare hours.
Right. Okay. Would anyone else like to add on to what they would like to see from this collaborative? And you can put it in the chat if you don't want to talk as well. questions? So we have talked about what some of you guys are doing in your individual communities to support families. So I won't go specifically into question number 3, but for number 4, there's some obvious resources like funding and everything that is needed for any venture to be successful. But what other resources or supports do you think would be needed to get these early learning innovations rolling and moving forward?
So I'm just going to go back to what I shared earlier. I think, and as we're learning in the national level discussions, there is a larger and louder push for the employers themselves, and even in some cases, the state governments, to put skin in the game in an effort to help communities solve their workforce challenges. If you look at what Colorado is doing, if you look at what Michigan is doing, for example, with its TriShare program, you have a state government as well as an employer, as well as the individual employee contributing approximately 33% of their overall cost of childcare. We need to be looking at solutions that are going to engage employers more, because we're in a position where this is the way we've always done it, just is not working well anymore. And our society has moved in a direction where, fortunately or unfortunately, the share of the burden needs to, and rightfully so, needs to be distributed over those who have a vested interest in the success of our workforce. The U.S. Chamber Foundation's take on it is the backbone of a strong U.S. economy is early childhood education. That is a really bold and also very valid statement that all of us need to take responsible for our own success or failure. And having the willingness of the state government, having the willingness of the employer to sit down at the table and say, hey, we are going to meet you where you're at, because we know there is going to be return on this investment for you personally and professionally, but certainly for us from an economic standpoint, that's a good spot to be. And more folks are seeing it from that perspective, and more folks need to see it from that perspective.
Thank you, Scott. Whenever he mentioned TriShare programs, has anybody else heard of that? Are you familiar with what that would look like?
So the TriShare program, again, on the Chamber Foundation's national level task force, we actually have representation from Michigan on there. Somebody who was very integrally involved in the rollout of that program, and he was very candid about, where they kind of dropped the ball. And one of the things that he pointed out, just as an example, is when TriShare as a concept was first put forth, they made the mistake of calling it a pilot. And because it was a pilot, a lot of businesses did not jump on board with the initiative, because it raised the question that automatically accompanies a pilot, and that is, so what happens when the state funding runs out? So not understanding that it wasn't a pilot, that it had been adopted by the state government, and that was the way the state was going to move forward. So since they have clarified the picture, if you will, they're having a much easier time getting businesses to partner with the state level entity and getting that done. So it certainly matters how you're messaging when you start talking about a state level initiative like that, and also making sure that the employers have a very clear understanding of what their roles and responsibilities are for taking care of their employees in that construct, and also giving the employees the peace of mind that, hey, we know how expensive this is. It was mentioned in the presentation that the childcare workforce on average in the state of South Dakota is making about $11 an hour. Well, we're almost identically paying the childcare workforce here in the state of Montana at that same rate. So yeah, you can't expect, you know, major league quality performance on Boys and Girls Club funding. It's not a realistic expectation. So if parents, and I know, you know, my wife has 3 kids and we're very fortunate that we do not have to use an outside provider for childcare because we have family close by and our schedules allow for a certain degree of flexibility. So we can cover all of those gaps and not necessarily be out of pocket for it. Parents deserve the peace of mind knowing that not only are their kids going to be safe, but for the educational components that it's going to be top notch, and that there are people who are willing to partner with them and give them that peace of mind and say, hey, we got you. So, you know, come alongside, we'll make sure that your kids are taken care of, and we can get you back to work and to be contributing to the local economy. So Michigan is recovering from their initial gaffe, if you will, of not messaging the initiative well. And they have been achieving a greater degree of success with getting the businesses to sign up and participate in that.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if have you guys had any conversations around the fact, you know, the numbers that Kayla threw out between the number of daycares we have in our state and the ones that are registered? Because it seems that the registered licensed daycares are the ones who get the funding, but they're not the only ones who need the assistance. And so how do we get more people registered, or what are those challenges and barriers that people are not doing that? I remember it was a year or so ago when the ARPA funding came out through the state, and there was a lot of conversation around that, and then the certification piece that some of the providers need in order to be considered licensed and registered. And I haven't followed up with that, so I just don't know. But has there been any conversation around maybe trying to fill that gap and get over that barrier that could potentially help? I know it won't cover all of the costs, but it could be one of the solutions.
Absolutely. I know that Learner South Dakota has been in a room with the Department of Social Services to talk about this and to address, you know, here's where we're falling short, and here's what people are telling us that they want and need. And really, like, the department has a plan, and that they have been hosting listening sessions and everything like that to get direct feedback from people as well. So that I do know that this is a priority of theirs right now, that they're working on it. And yeah, that was really, really rough on non-registered providers to not get that help and everything. You know, they were affected just as much as anybody else. And of course, we also don't really have a very good way to keep track of all of the unregistered providers. I think, trying to recall the statistic, I think we have about 100 registered providers in the state, whereas there is an estimated 2,000 unregistered providers. We don't know where those people are. We don't know who they are. We don't know how many kids they have. So, you know, another thing to help employers realize how important that this need is and childcare is in your communities is understanding, like, okay, these are all of the kids who need childcare. These are all the parents who need somewhere for their kids to go so that they can come to work and do a good job and be reliable. So there's definitely a lot of moving parts to it, but we're pretty much involved in all. Hi. Seeing lots of conversations going on. So, is there anything else you guys would like to contribute or state along these lines? Okay, if nobody has anything, and you can directly message me on the Early Learner SB account here or with Danielle. I am just going to turn off the screen for a little bit so I can help get the papers and everything collected, and then we will resume and kind of open up the floor for any additional questions from the people here and the people online.
wrap up your last comments here. If you like to move back to your seats, you sure can if you'd like. We're probably gonna have our table facilitators report out. So if it's uncomfortable or if you'd like to stay with your new group, you can stick around, either way. Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. I heard a lot of really great conversation happening in the room. And of course, it sounds like you guys made it through 1 and 2. So I gave you a little extra time to make sure we were able to do that. So that's wonderful. Who of my table facilitators would like to go first?
I'll go.
All right, yeah.
All right, so we have folks from
Everyone here, or do you need it one right number?
probably like Yep, I sound so loud. Okay, I'm Jess Romer with the John McCurvich Foundation, and at our table we have folks from Belfouche Economic Development, and we have an aspiring child care.
I did.
Yeah. So question 1, local solutions. Belfouche is lucky to have Pioneer Bank there, so they're already implementing that. And really so they have an economic development, workforce development plan, but realize we can't have workforce without the child care. So that's, I think like a lot of you are in that same situation. So they're really trying to find the solutions. And then where would you like this collaborative to go? And we really did talk about small communities don't have the resources like larger communities do. So how can this collaborative help small communities work together? Because there's a lot of feeding between different communities. How can we find a way to collaborate together to create like a co-op daycare, childcare that everyone contributes to? How do we help unregistered providers get registered was another suggestion. So we know where they are and say, hey, can you take a couple more kids? We can only take care of 2. And then another request was to have Kayla specifically, no. someone from the collaborative come to their community to do exactly what we're doing today and talk about what the resources are, what does social services have, what is available that perhaps may not be as well marketed, because we just learned a couple of things just in this conversation. And if the local community would promise to get people to the table and you show up and make it all work. Bulk purchasing for providers. So on the provider side, how can we decrease costs for them? Mentorships / apprenticeships / scholarships to work with high schoolers or others to get more childcare workers involved in the field. So this is a long list for you.
So pipelines.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, I'll record some of this later. But
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Cover costs of continuing education or help providers to step away from the child care so they can get the continuing education. Find a way to get a lot more money and time for all of these people. To offset wages, training, child-centered training, and startup costs.
And there's one more good, but the business side of this yelling was a lot of people are very passionate about caring for children, but they don't have the business model that's going to help them to be successful. So working with like the Small Business Development Center, helping them to make those connections to resources that, further their business plan, do some revenue projections, so they know what they're up against and then what they might need to apply for it.
Great example. We did have a Small Business Administration with us in our East River meeting, peer representation of East River. great ideas. I'll be presenting with, if anyone's a part of the EPA, Economic Development Professional Association, and we'll also be giving this presentation at the GOP conference in April as well. But I'm sure we could get community level presentations going if that is a Hi, I'm Jamie with United Way. At our table, we had a couple of former teachers as well as a former state leader, one with United Way and with Elevate City. So lots of great conversations. For local solutions happening, we mentioned like Monument Health did a survey for their employees when they heard that some of their staff were having trouble finding childcare. They then proactively surveyed all of their employees to find out and really understand what the need was for their entire group, and then found solutions and options to help us finding childcare. There have been conversations at schools about preschools on campus, so there's been some inroads on that. At one time, there were conversations with downtown Rapid City for providing success for childcare. Not happening here, but childcare in apartment complexes. And we know like Common Bond has done that in other communities, and Common Bond is getting more active here, so opportunities there. The YMCA pit stop, looking at how we can maybe build that. Providing incentives for providers to register. And then Judy shared that back in the early 90s, we actually did have a state position. It took them like 4 years to make it happen. And unfortunately, it went away over time. But we've done it once, we can do it again. Where would we like to see the collaborative go? Making the case for local businesses that this is an economic issue and that is just going to be a constant ongoing thing. Getting to know the new Secretary of Education, who's from Mitchell, being from a larger industrial city. Maybe there's inroads we can make just might understand the need, raising the level of awareness, understanding the need. So a more comprehensive surveys and data to get things like number of slots, the need for non-traditional hours, that kind of thing. And then we talked about what resources are most needed, funding, of course. But in addition to just general funding like the Curvitz Foundation, who are willing to support new things and taking risks on innovation. Collaboration, are getting various organizations, lots of different voices to the table. Utilizing the boards of key stakeholders, the boards of like Elevate, United Way, YMCA, etc., to help grow the support. Growing support from other communities through early learner communities, kind of like what we were talking about with Self-Reach. So getting other grassroots community support around the state to help bring it to the state's attention. And then we also mentioned transportation as a huge barrier for a lot of child care providers in that. And I'm going to quote one of the ladies at the table who's been here working in this for 36 years and said it is just so exciting that we are having this conversation.
Hello, everyone. I am Jeanette Grixel, and I'm from that long name STAEYC place. I'm the president of STAEYC, currently on my final year. I'll be wrapping up in June, so I'll stay on past Christmas, so you're not getting that. At the table with me, this could have been a more perfect fit for me because I am a former military spouse and have been 28 years in the Air Force. So we have our community childcare coordinator, Kara here, and Beth is the director of the CDC on base, and then we've also got Chris Hebert here, donor related Hills area community foundation. And we, I'm just loving hearing all these differences, that the different things these tables are bringing up. We have a few similarities, but differences as well. And I think we can learn from the Air Force on some solutions that we could do too. It reminded me of some talks Linda gave us. So some of the things that the Air Force has done, first off, they're prioritizing childcare and taking care of their childcare employees. They got a 16% base pay increase this year, and they're paying for free childcare for their employees, which I know some programs do. Not everybody has that luxury. And then almost 40% off the second child. And if you're a family childcare person, the Air Force is paying you to take care of your own children under the age of 8, which I thought was really cool to have that subsidized because they take up your slot. Now, granted, the Air Force only allows 6 children to be in your licensed childcare, even if it's off base. You're required to be registered through the state. You can only have 6 if you're licensed with the Air Force. So, quality, right? I know I used to do that. So, this thing will be a line to the South Dakota. Another thing we talked about was scholarships for our healthcare educators because South Dakota doesn't have a lot of requirements for childcare educators or child providers in our state. And so looking at them as non-traditional learners and trying to provide some supports in place to help them continue their education. And then a new one that I thought was really cool is learning from other communities, utilizing things like the Jumpstart program. This would be an example. Jumpstart program is childcare on site at City High School, but what if we turn that into a learning environment for childcare, like child development classes, where the students could go into a program like that and get hands-on experience learning. There's some other states, or there's a teacher here, Chris is white. And he has might travel to another program and learn that that's what they were doing, and so we can capitalize on that here. And then looking at where we would like to see this collaborative go. First off, learning more about what the collaborative is all about. So attending meetings, looking at trying to help with getting more state incentives, requiring registration for family childcare was mentioned. Workforce development supports, looking at like data that can show like how many, like quantifying childcare space to the number of workers that get back in our workforce for every childcare space we're allowed to have. That makes it national. And then the last bit, what are we doing to help families? The sibling discounts, so offering multiple child family discounts. Air Force is able to have a slight 14 level scale on rates, but the Air Force also has the capability of subsidizing that. So often the rates parents pay are cheaper than what they would pay like off the base. But could we look at subsidizing through balance or other things like Kaylee mentioned earlier? And then also the family childcare system gets subsidized. They get paid the same rates that the centers get paid, which doesn't always happen. Like often family childcare will charge less than centers. And that's all right. Your goals 1 and 2. Cool. Okay, so we are pretty diverse. So we had 2 childcare providers. We had someone from economic development in Spearfish, one of our childcare providers in Custer. We also had an employee from Rocky Surgical Hospital. We had somebody from Newswatch who posted Washington. And we also had somebody from the as well. So I'm going to try to cover things that weren't covered in other groups. I think our group talked a lot about some of the very similar things that these other groups did. One of the things that our group brought up is that any focus needs to include those families that are in the middle class, those that don't qualify for assistance, and back to that gap, that there's just an affordability issue for families that don't qualify for assistance. Our childcare providers also really brought up the importance to emphasize that birth to 3 care and how expensive it is to offer that, and how it's often the first thing to go because the ratios required to meet standards are prohibitive to actually getting people to be employed. So that's another thing that our group talked about. Our group is very passionate about the fact that none of this works without state subsidy, and to have state subsidy, we need a state champion. And that might also come in the form of some sort of business council that we know that, at least in our group, that many of the largest voices and the loudest voices are big industry in this state. And so having a council that is comprised of those businesses that focuses particularly on childcare as a workforce issue could be an opportunity to get people to listen and get people to the table. We talked about a lot of things.
But also just the public awareness of childcare being that critical infrastructure for everybody at the table. It's for families, it's for businesses, it's for childcare providers. And that, you know, all of this underlining is the fact that it's just really difficult to work in childcare and to be paid a livable wage. So I hope I summarized all of that. We went a lot of places. We're very passionate at our table. Thank you guys.
Callie didn't stand up. Stand up. My name is Samantha McGrath. I'm with Elevate Rapid City. We also had a really good group. We had the EDA represented, GOED, the YMCA, and Black Hills Energy. A lot of the things that we discussed had already been brought up, but we are, one of the things that we talked about was looking at how GOED and EDA does fund different programs and projects, and how we can kind of make the argument that childcare is a workforce development issue, it is an entrepreneurship issue, and so maybe there are ways that we can use some of the funding that's out there for feasibility studies, impact studies, the workforce development side of things. One thing that we talked about a lot that wasn't super mentioned was, is there a way that we can just elevate the prestige of what a childcare professional is? Can we celebrate them like we celebrate our teachers and our nurses? And I think that that could be really encouraging. Some of the other community projects that we have seen or we talked about were, you know, church conversions or different community center conversions. Hannah brought up a program in a community where the city, the economic development group, and a daycare provider all came together to acquire some land and reduce some overhead costs for the provider. So that was really cool. And there are other things that we talk about that particularly maybe just in our group, but how can we get more businesses involved? It has to be businesses that come to the table and really understand that this is affecting their bottom line as well. And so can we go to SHRM? Can we go to like the Realtors Association and give them the elevator pitch and get that collaboration from them as well? I feel like a lot of the other stuff that we talked about was kind of touched on. Really just if there is some kind of subsidy or a legislative change, making sure that communities kind of remain control, that we know our communities are diverse and that one solution is not going to be across the board solution. So.
Yes, thank you. Last but not least.
Okay, Alan Solano with the John McCurvich Foundation. We had Lee Deadwood, Spearfish, Custer communities represented, economic development, childcare, school district, city government. So kind of a nice mix of folks at the table. I'll try and not do too much repeating of what folks have talked about. There are a couple of the hotels that have like convention space or conference space up in the Lee Deadwood area that are doing some dedicated rooms. So you think about having breakout rooms for your conferences and what have you, that they're opening those up and utilizing those for an opportunity for people and their children. And it's got some downside to it because of course when conferences come in, those things have to be closed down, but still was seen as a pretty creative way of utilizing space. It's not, you know, it sits empty, you know, in these facilities most of the time. This early learner South Dakota, early learner Rapid City, Lee Deadwood, all of the early learners we talked about that's in and of itself, this effort in these communities is kind of an innovative solution to this, because this is the first time that we've really gotten, that we've thought that we've really had kind of diversity of people around the table, business to economic development, to schools, to childcare providers themselves. And so we need to maximize what we've been doing by coming together as a collaborative. A number of moms were shifting their schedules to form these we kind of call them pods or kind of parent networks where could be 3 or 4 parents that would come together and they provided childcare within themselves, doing things that way. Looking at these in the economic development area, as the new businesses are looking to come form up in South Dakota and create facility space, to start looking at the opportunities like what was done at the Black Hills Energy Building, you know, to be at whatever scale, and then partnering with the existing childcare providers, whether it's centers or in-home providers, to be able to come in and stand. It's parents that were coming together and sharing the cost of hiring a nanny and doing that within the home and the nanny services. The idea of flexible scheduling at work, more work from home. This was one I think that came from Wyoming that's being looked at in Custer, but how high school students can get involved in childcare centers and actually receive childcare development credits for working for these centers. And then we talked about pairing high school students with like the trade schools, so we can make sure they can get credit and move into some of these certification courses. A couple businesses that were paying to hold spots for staff, for their staff at childcare centers. They might purchase 1 or 2 spots, and those are being paid for whether they're filled or not. And then I think this was Custer area, where the school district had unused school and land, and then deeded that land over to the city. And so, you know, how do we maximize that use of those tend to be some bigger tracts of land and make sure we're including childcare. And then just the idea of planning infrastructure mindset in all of this, so we don't create childcare deserts like we end up with food deserts in our community, and be mindful as we're thinking about planning and zoning and economic development, what we do. One I added, we didn't talk about it, but I know South Dakota Housing Development Authority, and this isn't seen often by folks, but childcare, you know, it all talks about affordable housing. It also talks about affordable childcare, and we need to, I think about what can be tapped into in South Dakota Housing Development Authority to support, and as we're looking at housing developments, but support the childcare developments. On question 2, Kayla, you need to go to the communities and do the same thing. You heard that from the first table, but yeah, I think very much. Yeah, you might need that, but that I think being able to do this so that you can remove barriers for businesses and people to participate is local and you can hear from partners. And then again, how do we figure out how to engage with the folks that are not at the table? So the folks that aren't really seeing that this is something that affects them. Maybe it's a chamber, but we talked about the pickleball courts and, you know, so you have the senior community that has the time to advocate for, hey, we need to spend money on pickleball courts. And the parents don't have the time and what have you to be advocating to the government side for themselves. And then the issue of government entities who are not actively engaged in this, but actually are big consumers of our childcare resources. A couple examples that were used is, so you can take things like Custer State Park and how many employees that they have that really are kind of, you know, using up childcare resources, you know, in our Central Hills area. Well, are they ever at the table? You know, the surf lab, just how do we get those people to the table and see that this should be equally as important to them? as it is to the business community and childcare community.
Then Danielle, would you like to do, you have anything else to add from your, the online folks?
Okay, so we had a good bunch of people on Zoom. One of which Scott Wolf, who's from
Montana.
he's from Great Falls, Montana, I believe. He is also a part of the U.S. Chamber Foundation's childcare task force. And what they're doing in his town, and they are watching South Dakota to kind of model a statewide initiative of their own. But what they're doing there in Great Falls is that they're working on a hybrid collaborative model. They're partnering with the city for the space, and then they have a co-op of businesses that are providing the monetary investment to build a community education center. And that this will also play into their downtown improvement work that they're doing there as well. So they're engaging like hotels, restaurants, even like the taverns and bars and things like that. They're all kind of coming together and working on this because they want to offer safe and affordable childcare to their employees as part of their benefits package. He stated that, you know, every dollar for childcare that a business puts in brings a return of $4 more. So, I mean, that's a pretty good return on investment. And if businesses are willing to work with each other and understand that as an initial risk, you know, it would really pay off in the end. We also had Erica with YMCA and Custer as well. She says that a big support there is the early learner Custer group, that they really are putting effort towards like educating businesses and their local economic development chamber, just to like what the childcare needs are, just to, you know, make sure that everybody in the community is understanding where the needs are at and how we can meet them. We also had Nicole with the Helpline Center. Sorry, I'm just going to take these out. She's saying that they're running into a lot of issues with just being able to refer people to childcare because they're calling and, you know, they have this list of 25 providers who may or may not even have any openings, but they're just getting inundated with calls all of the time. People looking, it's like, I just need spots, you know? So she would like to see, you know, as more services become available, like maybe more communication regarding what's available in terms of like just enrollment and spots and everything in these facilities. We also had Mark with the Monument Health Foundation. They have a childcare facility available for Rapid City employees. However, it is not enough. They have quite a wait list. Also, there isn't anything available for their satellite facilities. So like in Spearfish, Fleet, Deadwood, Sturgis and Custer, you know, they would like to, you know, that could be something that they look at. He also recognized, you know, that he has a certain amount of flexibility because he has access to like family members and other support members for whenever his childcare needs, his personal childcare needs kind of go beyond what is available. But also recognizes that not everybody has that. And that is just a very, especially for people with odd schedules, even in healthcare, nurses and doctors, if they're working late into the night or overnight or anything, they have to rely on people in the community. There just aren't facilities for that. So he mentioned that it would be really great to see the collaborative just help get expanded hours into the evening, even overnight. And then also to kind of include kids over 5 for the after school kind of initiative. I let them know, you know, that's kind of more the after school networks lane. And we also had Amanda, she's the executive director for the Sturgis Economic Development Corp. And she mentioned that they had previously a public-private partnership with a childcare facility that they had there. That was between the Economic Development Corp and this childcare facility. A while back, this was sold so that, you know, the daycare actually owns the building now and everything. But this was kind of done as a solution to meet their needs that they were having in the community. She also kind of talked about how, you know, there is a barrier for people to become registered. It's a little difficult, and then things, you know, in times of desperation, like with the pandemic, and then the ensuing ARPA funding that came from that, you know, a lot of the unregistered providers were not able to get that. And a lot of them would be registered if they had a little bit easier access to that process. So it's kind of a little bit of everything we talked about. Awesome.
Thank you guys so much. We do only have a few minutes, but I did want to open it for, are there any additional questions from the group now hearing what every table really talked about that anyone would like to ask at this time?
So what's next?
All right. Yes, so we are going to be sending you out a follow-up email with all of the resources that we mentioned. And then we're also going to be sending you out a survey. We'd really like to know how you felt this meeting was facilitated, what you liked, what you didn't like. And again, if you felt like you didn't get a chance to say anything at your table, well, you have that opportunity in the survey. What we have heard, I'm basing this just off the December 8th meeting in Sioux Falls. It sounds like people were debating between meeting monthly or meeting quarterly. So I will say with surety here that we will at least meet on a quarterly basis. We are planning a joint Zoom meeting at the end of February. I'm not giving any dates because we have not set them. Our planning committee is looking at those dates as we speak. And bringing everyone together. I will give you another date I would like you all to pencil in. The Early Learner Summit will be taking place in Brookings in September 21st and 22nd. That is where we would like there to be the next joint in-person meeting for the collaborative. Another thing I would tell you is that this is an open invitation. If there are folks that aren't here that you believe would be interested in the conversation or helping to provide solutions, we want you to give them our information. I actually will have my information on the last slide here today, but please share my contact information. Danielle and Audrey also work for me, and you can get in touch with them as well. Or any of our planning committee members. If you know Laura, if you know Jess, Alan, I mean, they will get you in touch. So we do know that we are going to be increasing the solutions page. That's number one. Micro kind of small community business solutions that can happen now. And then we are going to be looking, like I said, making that long-term plan. And that's part of what some of this collaborative is going to be working on. So again, looking forward to having you join us again in February for some follow-up conversations. But first, I would like to just transition real quickly. Jamie, I believe, had even mentioned it in one of their that philanthropic piece. And I would like to give Alan a minute to talk a little bit about JTVF's investments and their learning opportunities.
Thanks, Kayla. As Kayla had indicated earlier in her slides, the John T. Vukovich Foundation has been involved in early learning for quite a number of years, well in advance of my being at the foundation. And they've done it in a number of different programs. Probably a big key one has been the Starting Strong program that focuses on early learning, and it's really on these gap children. And really only say that to kind of set the stage that as a foundation, we really are committed to trying to work within this issue of early learning and really seeing it as the idea of quality early learning, quality childcare really has to be seen as part of the infrastructure of a community. And we really believe that as a foundation, if we're trying to do something just by ourselves, the amount of influence that we can have on any particular issue is limited. And so we're working hard on developing some plans and we'll look forward, I think, to an announcement within the next few to several weeks on some things that we think can help continue to create this collaborative work together with the providers, with the business community, with other philanthropy to continue to spur the idea or the innovations that are going to need to come with us making a difference as a community or as communities when it comes to quality early learning and childcare. So I want to introduce our newest staff person, and many of you probably know her already, but Callie Tisdale. Stand up, Callie, you can't just wave. So, okay, now sing and dance. So Callie is our communication specialist. So I just wanted you to hear her name because you're gonna all at some point get an email from her or emails from her. And so I just want you to know that if anything comes from Callie, it's really, really important information. And so make sure you open that up and take a look at it. But I want to end just on behalf of the foundation and the early learning work that we've been doing. How appreciative we are of the folks in the room, folks online with us. I'm born and raised in Rapid City. This is the first time I've ever seen the issue of early learning and childcare where we've had a diversity of representation really coming to the table and looking at solutions. And so big thank you to Early Learner South Dakota and the efforts of Kayla and all of the people associated with that. So with that, Kayla, thank you.
Appreciate it, Alan. And we appreciate what the foundation is investing in early learning. So I do want to just make sure I have more business cards out in the car. And of course, the one thing I forget is the business cards, but please feel free to take a picture. My contact information is up here. Info at early learning, earlylearnersd.org is also just the general mailbox. You may be, you will see my signature line, but you may get an email from me, Danielle, Audrey, Janessa, who knows? All of us are tag teaming and making sure that we communicate with you as quickly and effectively as possible. I just want to thank you guys for being here, the tremendous conversation we've had. And also, if you can help push out the story, we had several media individuals here today, I think 4. So that is wonderful. But we would also like you to take advantage of our hashtag Solve South Dakota, or Solve Childcare. Solve South Dakota Childcare. You know, same thing. So Solve Childcare. Post it on your business or personal media pages, please. If you would like us to take a picture, Audrey, Danielle, and I are available to do that for you. And any other questions? I had one question. It was from the media. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I heard lots of great conversations at your table, so thank you so much for that. I look forward to continuing the conversation. I hope you have a wonderful day. Group photo. If anyone wants to be in a group photo, I would love that. Just right up here, right here. Yeah, we should probably take a table photo. Anyway, yeah. We're on it. There's another one, right? I think there's another half. Well, are you not here? Well, are you taking it?
Are we just like a giant room?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Right. Oh, yeah. Anybody else? You're good. Perfect. Right, 1, 2, 3. Did you issue question yesterday? What was that question? Yeah. Like we definitely have a lot of ways around the city. And I know that continues to grow. I think it's expanding out in our. I can always. I think you got that wrong.